Hey, just wanted to put this at the start of the video to just say this is a remake of one of the epilogue stories for Rebecca and the Freak. So this episode takes place after Rebecca and the Freak, but before everything else. I just want to clarify that so that people don't get confused. Uh, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll shut up now. Rebecca once again awoke to the ear-splitting sound of her digital alarm clock beeping. She let out a groan and rolled over to switch it off. Her eyes fluttered open as she stared at the ceiling with her hazy, tired vision. The corners of the walls leading up towards the ceiling were blurred by her contactless eyes. It was the dawn of a brand new day. Her room was slightly dimmer today. Outside was drab with a threat of rain, as was typical for Northern Ireland. Rebecca blinked as her gaze was fixed above her bed. As she thought about what had happened the night before, was this Mr. Freakshow actually real? Had everything just been a dream? But if that were the case, how did she get back in her apartment? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she lay, staring up towards the peeled paint on her ceiling. However, she wouldn't have to wait long for a solid answer. "Good morning, Rebecca!" Freakshow's head suddenly appeared in front of Rebecca's line of sight. Even through the haze, their yellow eyes pierced the dim light of the morning. Rebecca screamed and Freakshow did the same, their head suddenly snapping away from sight. Rebecca scrambled up in her bed and could make out Freakshow standing in her doorway, their necks shrinking into their body, after stretching out to surprise Rebecca. It would seem that everything that had happened last night was, in fact, real. What the fuck was that? Rebecca yelled as she began to rise from the bed, still in her t-shirt from last night, but paired with pink pajama shorts. She clumsily pawed at the drawer next to her to find her contacts. I just wanted to say good morning. I assumed you'd heard me come in, so I didn't think I'd scare you. Freakshow rambled as they fidgeted with their fingers. What are you doing in my apartment anyway? Rebecca demanded from the demon as they took a gentle step forward. You invited me over last night after we made a fool out of that Bradley fellow, and you allowed me to stay over because, my house has seen better days. They said in yet another ramble, Rebecca realizing they were the type to over-explain things. She sighed as she stood up from the bed, stumbling slightly as she did so. Freakshow immediately went to help her, thinking that something was wrong. Are you alright? Is your head still sore from last night? They asked as Rebecca pulled away. I'm fine. I just need to get to the bathroom to put my contacts in. I'm practically blind without them, she said with a frustrated exaggeration as she left the room and hobbled into the bathroom. Freakshow stood outside the door for a couple of minutes, twiddling their thumbs and humming a tune to themselves. When Rebecca finally left the room, she stopped in her tracks and looked up to Freakshow, who had to slouch slightly in order to fit their tall frame into the hallway of Rebecca's cramped apartment. They looked somewhat frightening. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim space, and their mouth was extended into a sharp-toothed grin, an expression Freakshow probably intended to look friendly, but made them look rather horrifying. But Rebecca just rolled her eyes at this and ambled into the kitchen to make breakfast. As she was mulling over the ingredients in her fridge, Freakshow wasn't far behind, following her around like a house cat. Rebecca could feel them looming over her and she turned to face them. Can I help you? She asked, frustrated both from their bizarre antics and because Rebecca is not much of a morning person. Freakshow looked past her and into the fridge. It was fairly bare but did have the essentials that one would need in order to survive. Are you making food? They asked with a tilt of their head. Rebecca turned back to the fridge, and then to the demon in her home, realizing that they were a guest as she had invited them in, and so she should probably be a bit less crabby to them. She took a deep breath to steady herself before saying, I am, yeah, make yourself at home. She smiled up to the new, unlikely friend, who smiled back with a warm gaze. Thank you very much. I have to say, I am rather famished. I suppose that's what happens when one sleeps for a whole century. They said cheerfully as they sat at the small kitchen table, which only had 2 chairs. Time passed and Rebecca was throwing together an Ulster fry, a breakfast commonly made up of bacon, eggs, sausages, and potato bread, or soda bread if one so fancied. However, Rebecca didn't have either, so instead she just used toast. Freakshow watched quietly as she prepared breakfast, cooking everything in the same pan, aside from the sausages, which were in the oven. She happily hummed to herself as she seemed to be in her element, seamlessly moving from the stovetop to the sink to fill up the kettle. She turned to Freakshow and asked, "Tea or coffee?" Freakshow perked up at the address and answered, "Tea, please." They responded warmly as Rebecca smiled before turning back to her work, flicking the kettle on to boil while getting out 2 mugs, placing a tea bag in one for Freakshow, while getting out the instant coffee for herself. Not long after, a timer went off, indicating the sausages were done. She grabbed a tea towel and opened the oven up, taking out the sausages and placing them on the unlit part of the stovetop. She knelt down and got 2 plates out of the cupboard, before switching the stove off and plating the food. "Do you want butter on your toast?" she asked over her shoulder to her inhuman houseguest. Have you got any jam?" they asked. Rebecca paused briefly before walking to the fridge. She looked inside and found a jar of strawberry jam. It was almost empty, but had just enough inside for Freakshow's toast. "I do!" she called before taking the jar out of the fridge. From there, she prepared everything. Breakfast was plated up, drinks were made, and she presented the meal to her guest. The pair sat in silence for a while as Rebecca ate, while Freakshow just stared at the plate in front of them. Rebecca noticed this, and after taking a sip of her coffee, she asked, "You good?" Freakshow didn't say anything, their yellow eyes transfixed on the food. Before Rebecca could ask again if they were alright, their face suddenly morphed into an enormous toothy maw before they slammed their head into the table, devouring the breakfast as well as the plate in a matter of seconds. Rebecca looked on, wide-eyed and slack-jawed, as Freakshow rose their head back up, chewing and crunching away the food on shards of plate before swallowing and licking their lips with a grey forked tongue. That was scrummy!" they said. Rebecca would have found their slang odd if not for the display she had just witnessed. Freakshow saw her dismayed expression and shrank into themselves. "Oh, I do apologize for my lack of manners. Like I said, it's been a long time since I last ate. I guess I just got a bit excited." Rebecca blinked once before shaking away the shock. It's fine. Although you do owe me a new plate," she said, the last part delivered with brutal honesty. Freakshow picked up their cup of tea and took a sip, but after swallowing, their face fell in disappointment before they turned back to Rebecca. "I'm sorry, do you have any sugar? I like my tea very sweet. I should have said so earlier. Again, I do apologize." They bowed their heads slightly as a gesture of apology. Rebecca swallowed her mouthful of toast before pointing behind her and responding, "It's in the cupboard over there." Freakshow thanked her and extended their arm, the limb stretching across the room to where Rebecca had pointed to. They opened the cupboard and pulled out a box of sugar, retracting their limb back to its normal size, before reaching into the pocket of their coat and pulling out a teaspoon. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at the fact they just had a spoon in their pocket. However, before she could ask why they would have this, she watched as Freakshow, rather than using the spoon to add small amounts of sugar to their drink, poured the sugar straight from the box into the cup. A solid stream of granulated sweetness fell from the box and into the liquid for about 5 seconds. Before stopping, Freakshow repeated their stretchy antics and replaced the sugar, while stirring the tea with the spoon from their other hand. With this bizarre display finished, Freakshow took another sip of their tea, this time seeming much more pleased with the outcome. Just how I like it. Although... They trailed off, snapping their fingers, which to Rebecca's shock began to produce sparks like a lighter. "It is a tad cold," Freakshow said before snapping their fingers one last time, and at this, a small flame lit at their fingertip. Rebecca watched in surprise as they took a deep breath and blew on the small flame, causing it to grow in size and shoot forward, similar to a lighter flame when hit with an aerosol. Freakshow directed this flame towards their tea, which quickly began to boil and bubble erratically. After a couple of seconds, they seemed satisfied and shook the flame away from their hand. They took another sip of the now scalding hot tea and smiled, steam literally billowing out of their nostrils. They sighed. Much better. Yeah, I'll call you once I'm feeling better. Bye, Mr. Matthews. Rebecca hung up the phone after making a call to her boss, faking a sickness as to not go into work. Freakshow sat on the sofa, looking at the depression on the opposite cushion where Rebecca would sit, before their attention was broken by Rebecca herself actually sitting down on the spot. "Alright, I'm not going into work, which means I now have time to ask you some questions." she said, looking to the demon across from her. They furrowed their brow, confused by the notion. Questions? What could you possibly want to know about me? Freakshow asked, placing a hand on their chest. Rebecca sighed and shifted in her seat so she could fully face them. I know you're a demon and you can shapeshift, as well as apparently make portals and shoot fire out of your fingers, but I feel like there's more to you. What exactly are you? Why are you here? Do you have a family? At that last question, Rebecca saw something flash behind Freakshow's golden eyes. The briefest look of longing, twinged with a pain she knew all too well. Rebecca glanced to the side, rubbing her shoulder. Okay, what about your powers? Can you do anything else? Freakshow looked at her, the pain from before vanishing from their eyes as quickly as it had appeared, as they straightened their posture in their seat. Well, what you've seen is about the long and short of it. Snapping my fingers, I can produce fire. I can summon portals to anywhere within a 1 mile radius, although that particular spell is exhausting, so I can only do it so many times before needing to rest. They said, rotating their hand. As they did so, wisps of magenta light danced around it. Rebecca watched this with the same eager enthusiasm as a child watching a circus act. Spell? So it's like magic? She asked, before Freakshow chuckled and reached into their inner coat pocket. No, my friend, it's not like magic, they said before producing a large book from within. Rebecca's eyes widened at this, as the book looked far too large to even be inside their pocket. It is magic, they proclaimed as they presented the book. Its corners accented with golden decorations, and a label in its center, adorned in a runic language Rebecca didn't recognize. She stared at the book, her mouth agape, and her face holding an expression that could best be described as bamboozled. How did you... She trailed off, completely gobsmacked at the display. Freakshow chuckled and set the book down on the nearby coffee table, before opening their coat and showing Rebecca its internal pocket, which had golden stitching on it, swirling symbols and patterns around what was unmistakably an infinity loop. This is a hex I had placed on my pocket. Inside is an endless pocket dimension that I can pull anything I want out of, including that spellbook, they said, gesturing to the book next to them. Rebecca looked to it before moving to pick it up. Opening the heavy tome, she saw more of the runes within, alongside illustrations that may be showing what the spells were. However, since the book was in an unknown language, she couldn't be sure. It does have its limits, however. It can only conjure items that physically exist, and I cannot pull anything made out of flesh and bone, they finished, taking the book from Rebecca's hands and replacing it inside their coat. Rebecca shook her head as if to dislodge the shock of bending time and space using a dusty old coat. She took a moment to regain her bearings, before looking to Freakshow yet again. So, is shapeshifting some kind of spell as well? She asked with a cock of her head. Freakshow smiled and shook their head. No, my friend, that is all natural, they said with a grin before continuing. I am a demon known as an Itzazuna. We are a highly skilled species with vast transformative capabilities, they said, their speech laced with pride. Rebecca cocked her head to the other side before asking, what kind of capabilities? Freakshow took hold of their lapels as they prepared to explain. There are many shape-shifting demons within the Underearth. Doppelgangers, for example, are quite common, but they can only take on humanoid forms. And then there are mimics, which can turn into most anything, even inanimate objects, something even my own kind can't do. Before they could continue, Rebecca moved forward, a gleam of intrigue in her emerald green eyes. When you say inanimate objects, does that mean stuff like treasure chests for unsuspecting adventurers to open? She looked to the demon, wide-eyed and curious. They were taken aback by the sudden interruption, but eventually found the words to respond. Yes, I suppose so. Why do you ask? Rebecca scooted away from the demon and did a small fist bump to herself. No reason. She chuckled. But if even you can't do that, what makes your species so different from others? She asked. Freakshow's face lit up, as they were finally getting to the meat and potatoes of the conversation. They held their head up high, replaced their hands on the lapels, and said, "We are the only shapeshifters capable of changing sex." Rebecca was taken aback by the sudden admission, but after letting it settle for a moment, she responded, "So, you're gender fluid?" She said gently to the demon, who stared blankly at the younger woman, slowly letting go of their lapels. "Gendo, what?" they asked, with Rebecca realizing that perhaps that was a loaded question for someone who had spent the last 100 years sleeping. "Oh, well, gender fluid means... it means... Rebecca faltered, realizing she wasn't particularly knowledgeable on that sort of thing. But she did know someone who may be able to help. "Okay," she said, standing up. "I don't know how to tell you about all... that, but I know someone who can, so just stay here for a bit and I'll go get ready." She gave a double thumbs up before leaving the room to go and have a shower. Freakshow now sat alone on the sofa, looking at their hands and trying to copy Rebecca's gesture. The doors to the elevator slid open and Rebecca and Freakshow stepped out. Rebecca was in her usual attire, although this time with a plain black t-shirt, as she had slept in the one from last night. The pair walked outside into the cold air of an autumn morning. Rebecca felt a chill run up her spine and decided to remove her flannel from her waist and wear it over herself. Meanwhile, Freakshow looked as though they were literally about to freeze to death. Rebecca approached her car and opened the passenger side door, gesturing for Freakshow to climb inside. They did so, happy to be out of the cold, and marvelling at its interior. Rebecca's car was an older model, so to many something as mundane as the inside would not be of particular note, but not to the demon who had slept for 100 years. Rebecca opened the driver's side and parked herself within the seat. Once comfortable, she plunged the key into the ignition and... "Oh, right," she groaned. "Car's broken," she said as she placed the key back into her pocket. "Sorry, Mr. Freakshow, we're gonna have to walk," she said as she stepped out of the vehicle, with Freakshow reluctantly following. The pair made their way down the street. To their left was a stone wall overlooking the nearby seafront that reflected the grey skies above. A gentle breeze flowed through the air, catching on a nearby tree, its branches now bare, all the golden leaves littering the ground as the pair walked along. As they did, Freakshow took in the sights, the streetlights, little corner shops, even catching a glimpse of Terry's fast food. "My word," they began. "Melonsburg has certainly changed a lot since my day," they said as they placed their gloved hands into their pockets. Rebecca looked to them and smiled. "Yeah, I guess a lot can change in a century," she said with a chuckle as she turned to look towards the sea. Even on a dreary day like this, the view was simply gorgeous. As they carried on, Freakshow shivered and grimaced at the cold weather. Rebecca noticed this and giggled. Freakshow frowned before saying, "I don't see why we can't just use one of my portals to get to this friend of yours." Their teeth chattered like the keys on a xylophone. Rebecca looked to the side for a moment before responding. "Well, look, I've seen enough movies to know people can be cruel to stuff they don't understand. So, maybe just keep all the demon and magic stuff on the download while we're in public. Especially here. This town has like 5 different churches. It'll cause a moral panic," she said to her new friend. They paused for a moment, seeming to be in thought, before, without saying a single word, their eyes shifted hue from yellow to blue, as a way for them to appear more human. Time passed and they were getting close to the house of Rebecca's friend. The walk was short and fairly quiet. However, as they were nearing their destination, Freakshow decided to speak up. "You know, you asked me all those questions about me, but I haven't asked a single thing about, well, you," they said, with Rebecca seeming taken aback by this. "Oh, well," she spoke nervously. "There isn't much to know. To be honest, I'm kinda boring." She chuckled. "Oh, come now," Freakshow responded. "If we are to be acquaintances, then I want to know everything about you," they said with exaggerated hand movements. "Now, come on, out with it. I wish to know everything," they said with jovial enthusiasm. Rebecca went a tad red in the face at this, but shook away her blush and thought about what to tell the demon. "Well, I work in a kitchen. Kinda don't love it, but hey, it pays the rent," she began, the demon fascinated by the description of the most mundane of lifestyles. "I'm 19 years old. I've been living in that apartment for about 1.5 years now. I used to live with my girlfriend, Miranda, but..." She trailed off. Freakshow remembering her bringing something like that up the night before. She carried on. To be honest, I blame myself for her leaving. I don't think I'm pretty enough for someone like her. She was amazing. She looked to her side, feeling the desire to hide away creeping in, a desire she was now all too familiar with. Freakshow hesitated for a moment, but gently placed a tender hand on her shoulder. The gesture made Rebecca stop in place, and Freakshow did the same. She looked to them, their blue eyes like pools of deep water, bearing a gaze of the most gentle sorrow. Rebecca, if this girlfriend of yours truly did leave you because of how you looked, then I believe that is her own problem, and not yours. And as I said last night, you look perfectly fine. One may even say you're beautiful. Rebecca's eyes went glassy with welling tears. She turned her back to Freakshow and blinked the tears away. And before they could say another word, she spoke up again. We're nearly there. It's just up the road here. She then started forward, and after a moment of silent worry, Freakshow followed behind her. The pair carried on in silence for a while longer, until eventually making it to the bottom of a hill, where they were faced with a row of terraced houses. Rebecca led the way, not saying a single word, her face a mask of unresolved emotion. Freakshow wanted to reach out, to say something to ease their new friend, but before they could, she suddenly halted in place and turned to face one of the houses. We're here, she said bluntly. The house looked the same as all the others, squat and thin, with some outer windows and a wooden door, painted a rich blue. Rebecca approached the door and knocked 3 times, the sound echoing within the quiet neighborhood. Silence followed for a short few seconds, before being broken by a loud, frustrated groan from within the house. Silence fell once more, before the sound of angered muttering permeated from behind the door, before it suddenly swung open, revealing the house's occupant. Pax, what are you doing here? It's like super early. The person who stood before them was tall and slender, with dark skin and a face dotted with black freckles. Atop their head was some form of silk bonnet. They wore a baggy grey t-shirt with the word Metallica scrawled across, alongside black boxer shorts. Rebecca furrowed her brow before responding to the person they had come to meet with. Ellie, it's nearly 11:30. Ellie frowned and looked to Rebecca with a less than pleased expression. I was working last night. Didn't get home until after 7 this morning. This remark caused Rebecca to let out a nervous chuckle. Ellie then turned her deep brown eyes to Freakshow before saying, Who's he? Freakshow was slightly taken aback by the brash address. However, Rebecca soon answered. Okay, look, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I promise it's true. Ellie raised an eyebrow, and Rebecca took a deep breath before getting to her explanation. Okay, this is Mr. Freakshow, and he is... They? Freakshow suddenly interrupted. My species uses they. Rebecca shared a glance with Ellie for a moment. Right, sorry. Anyway, they're a shape-shifting demon I met in the Hellview house, and they had some questions for you. She gave a nervous, toothy grin to the woman in the doorway, who just stared blankly before saying, Bex, I'm not in the mood for this shit. Just come back later when it's time to practice for tonight's gig. She began to close the door before it was suddenly stopped by Freakshow's gloved hand. Wait, they said. Ellie looked to them with an unamused glare before, with no warning or fanfare, they morphed and shifted into a near-perfect doppelganger of Rebecca. Ellie stood flummoxed at the display. Her jaw hung agape for several seconds, before she opened the door wider and said, I'm gonna make some coffee. You make yourself comfortable. She then turned away from the pair, her worldview well and truly shattered from what she had just witnessed. Right, take me back to the start, yeah? Too tired for this shit, man. Ellie said as she poured herself a cup of coffee from a coffee press. Rebecca and Freakshow were now sat across from the woman at her kitchen table. The surrounding room was small, the walls a pale blue with white accents. Ellie was now wearing sweatpants and mismatched socks, along with a black choker around her neck, something Freakshow found unusual. Of all the things she could wear at that moment, why did she choose that? Well... Rebecca started before trailing off. Maybe you should explain this stuff to her, Mr. Freakshow, she said, turning to her new tall friend. Perhaps you're right, Freakshow said, shifting slightly in their chair. Before you start, Ellie said after taking a big swig from her coffee, you're like a shapeshifter, yeah? Well, yes, Freakshow responded. But there is more to it than that, they said, thinking of the best way to explain what they were to this new human before them. I am a demonic creature known as an Itzazuna. We are a skilled race of shapeshifters from a realm beneath your own called the Underearth, or Hell, as you might call it. They spoke, calm and with purpose, as if what they were saying didn't sound completely mad. So... Ellie said, pouring herself another coffee after polishing off the first. If Hell's real, does that mean, like, Satan's real too? She said, flashing a smirk. Freakshow's eye twitched slightly at the question, and Rebecca noticed they seemed slightly uncomfortable. Yes, he is more than real. Freakshow stuttered out. Ellie was not completely privy to their mannerisms, so she didn't pick up on their uneasiness. Metal. She smiled, before taking another big swig of her coffee. If I may continue, please. Freakshow collected themselves, and Ellie nodded, motioning with her hand for them to keep talking. As I was telling Rebecca this morning, I have many different abilities. Some I was born with, like the shapeshifting, and some I taught myself through using this. Freakshow reached into the inner pocket of their dazzling jackets and pulled out their spellbook. This has granted me the ability to summon portals, Freakshow said with waving fingers, a small amount of magic shimmering between the digits. As well as... well, it may be better if I just show you. They snapped their fingers, and a small flame lit on the tip of their clawed index, which Ellie seemed to find especially impressive. And giving me this. Freakshow opened up one side of their coat, revealing its inner pocket. As I explained to Rebecca, this is a special hex that allows me to store and pull out an unlimited amount of, well, anything really. As long as it's not of flesh and blood, and is something that actually exists, it's in here somewhere, they said, before closing their coat yet again. Bloody hell, Ellie sighed, still tired. That's like real cool and all, but why are you two here telling me all this? Bex, is there like actually a point to all this? Ellie questioned, turning back to Rebecca, seeming still annoyed they woke her up. Well, Mr. Freakshow was telling me basically everything they just told you, but then they said something about how their kind, is that Itzazuna, Freakshow interrupted. Thanks. They were telling me the Itzazuna are the only shapeshifters that can change sex. Ellie raised an eyebrow at this. And so I told them that makes them gender fluid, but since they've been asleep for 100 years, they obviously don't know what that means. And I have a hard time explaining that kind of thing to people, so I thought you might be able to help. Rebecca finished her long ramble with a nervous grin towards her work friend, who yet again raised an eyebrow before finishing her second cup of coffee. And you thought I'd be able to explain gender identity to your new demon boyfriend. Is this 'cause I'm trans? Rebecca's face briefly flushed with a red hue before she began to talk again. They aren't my boyfriend! We only met last night! No, I'm just asking because you... She spoke quickly in a panic before Ellie interrupted with a laugh. Chill, Bex. I'm just messing with you, Ellie said, cracking a wide grin. Sorry, I'm confused, Freakshow interjected. What is trans? Ellie's grin faded as she let out an exhausted groan before looking back to her coffee pot. She then lethargically rose from her chair before walking over to the fridge. I'm gonna need to wake up more for this one, she sighed, pulling out a canned energy drink. She cracked it open and chugged half the tin in a few large gulps. She then sat down in her chair before she began to speak again. I'm transgender, she began. Which means I was born as a man, but I'm actually a woman. So I'm doing things to transition into who I really am, hence the name. She exposited before taking another drink from the can. You can probably hear my voice is a lot deeper than other women, and I wear makeup, and I'm growing my hair long, and I'm also saving up to get some special medicine to help me grow tits. As she said this, she patted her flat chest as if to emphasize her point. Hell, you see this around my neck? She pointed to the choker. It covers up my Adam's apple, cause I can't stand looking at it. Ellie seemed a tad uneasy telling all this to someone who was basically a stranger. However, Freakshow's face showed they were listening intently, and that they even understood what she was saying. I see. You know, you and I are alike in that way. Sometimes I desire to be a different version of myself. And you know, if you'd like, I could use some magic to aid you in this transition of yours. Ellie was taken aback by what they said. Not only that they understood what she was talking about and even related to it in a way, but that they actually wanted to help her. She thought for a moment, before smiling and saying, "Nah, I'm alright. I do appreciate the offer though." She then poured the rest of her drink down her gullet in one swift motion. Freakshow was perplexed by this, wondering why she wouldn't want a quick and easy solution to something that clearly bothered her. However, before they could say anything, she began to speak once more. "As for you, let's get one thing clear, yeah?" She shifted in her seat, now sitting upright. "Gender and sex? Not the same thing. Rebecca ain't got a Scooby-Doo what she's on about." Ellie shot Rebecca a look, causing her to sink into her seat with a nervous chuckle. "Sex is what you got going on down there. Gender is more just the idea of it. Basically, it was made to sell clothes and shit. It's not this end-all, be-all thing like some say, but it is important to some people, like me. I go by she and her, and nothing else." Freakshow furrowed their brow in thought, thinking on what had just been said. "I see. I suppose that does make sense. For us, we do physically change what's down there, as you would say," they said, lowering their voice towards the final remark. Ellie nodded, before leaning forward as if to emphasize what she was about to say. "Bottom line is, it's what you wanna be called as, yeah? If you want to say you're gender fluid, then you can. No one's going to stop you, or make you feel bad for being yourself. Got it?" She spoke with purpose and conviction. Freakshow was slightly taken aback, not expecting this from the so far relaxed and tired woman before them. They gave a firm nod, and Ellie smiled to them. "Sick," she said, as she crushed the empty can in her hand and threw it over her shoulder, it landing with a loud clatter on the floor beside the bin. Not long after this conversation had concluded, a sound suddenly emitted from Ellie's pocket, the ringtone of her phone. She took the device from her pocket and looked at the screen, but for her face scrunched with frustration, and she let out a groan to match. "Ah! Randy's flaked on us again!" she shouted as she tried not to throw her phone across the room. Rebecca let out a similar exclamation of anger as Freakshow sat in confusion. "Who is this Randy, and why has he flaked on you?" Ellie got up from her seat and began pacing the small kitchen with her hands firmly dug into her pockets. "He's meant to be our drummer for tonight's gig, but he's bailed. Said something about washing his hair. He's fucking bald!" she exclaimed as she threw her hands into the air. Rebecca groaned in frustration again. He always does this! Why do we even work with this guy?" she said as she rested her head on the table. Freakshow watched the two women deliberate on the situation for a few minutes, before deciding to speak up. "I could help. I am rather proficient at many musical instruments, and I am a rather swift learner. I do not see why I wouldn't be able to take the place of this flaky fellow," they said in a matter-of-fact way. Rebecca and Ellie looked to one another for a short moment, before Ellie said, "Alright, you're on. I'm gonna change and then you can show me what you got." She then left the room, moving upstairs to get dressed for the day ahead. Rebecca and Freakshow sat for a long while on Ellie's beat-up sofa, its colour a dusty brown, with a discoloured patch with stitches around the edge on one of its arms. The space looked unkempt, as though it had not been taken care of. "My, this friend of yours is certainly Messy? Freakshow said, looking around. Rebecca gave them a nudge and scowled. Give her a break. She works super late and doesn't always have the time or energy to keep up with this kind of stuff, she said firmly, making Freakshow feel bad for their comment. After some time spent waiting, Ellie could be heard thundering down the stairs. She entered the room. Her hair was tied into a long, dreadlocked ponytail. She wore a deep red crop top, exposing a piercing in her belly button. Black torn jeans covered her long legs, with makeshift patches of red and blue stitched onto some parts. And her look was tied together with heavy-looking boots, with blue flames snaking up them that added an extra 5 inches to her 6-foot frame. "Alright, follow me," she said, flashing a grin from her blue-painted lips. The group went upstairs, traversing a small hallway before entering into Ellie's bedroom. Freakshow surveyed the small space. The walls were covered almost floor to ceiling with posters from various bands, shows, comics, games, and movies that occupied Ellie's interests. Atop a chest of drawers was a vivarium tank, where Freakshow could just make out the coiled shape of a small snake. Her bed was messy, and her closet looked to be bursting at the seams. "Okay, so the song we're playing is called Baby You're a Haunted House," Ellie said as she produced her phone from her pocket. She tapped at the screen before plugging in a set of earbuds and handing them to Freakshow. "Put these in your ears. It'll let you listen to the music while Bex and I talk," she said as Freakshow eyed the unusual device they had been given. They parted their hair, revealing pointed, elven ears beneath the bird's nest on their head. They placed the buds into each ear, and, after examining the phone for a moment, pressed the play button and began listening to the music. As they did so, Ellie turned to the closet, which she opened and began looking through what was inside. "What are you doing?" Rebecca asked as she turned to the closet. Ellie took out a black blazer and white shirt, which she then threw onto the bed. "Looking for any outfit for Demon Days over there?" she said, gesturing back to Freakshow, who was looking into the vivarium, mimicking the snake as it flicked out its tongue. "Like, they looks cool and all," Ellie continued, "but I think they need something a bit less, 18th century," she said as she reached down and picked up a pair of brown dress shoes, which she also tossed onto the bed. "I didn't think this sort of stuff was your style, Els," Rebecca said, as Ellie placed a leather belt and black necktie into her hands. "They were for my cousin Ty's wedding, and you're right, they're like so not my thing," she said as she pulled out a pair of denim jeans. And it was as she did this that Freakshow had finished the song. "I say," they started as they removed the earbuds. "That was like nothing I've ever heard before." They handed Ellie her phone and earbuds, which she pocketed. "I like it!" The demon beamed, and Ellie smiled in response. "Think you'll be able to play along to it?" she asked before Freakshow grinned, proudly stating, "I do believe I can." Rebecca and Ellie shared a high five, a motion that perplexed Freakshow. However, they were unable to question it, as Ellie soon directed their attention to the clothes on the bed. "Alright, try all that on. Can't have you walking around like an extra in Orbal Histories." Freakshow turned to the bed and surveyed the items. They didn't move for several seconds. Instead, right before the eyes of Rebecca and Ellie, the clothes already on their body morphed and shifted into the items before them. However, their blazer remained purple, just now a much lighter, more rich hue, and their gloves followed in this regard. The woman stared in awe at this display, as Freakshow turned to face them. "What do we think?" they said, raising their arms to the sides. "Is it still Horrible Histories? Whatever that is?" they asked, as Ellie smiled and crossed her arms. "Not bad, but why didn't you just put them on like a normal person?" she asked. Freakshow looked down to themselves before saying, "Well, this is how I always dress myself. And I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I myself am not exactly normal." Ellie laughed at this before she squinted at the demon's appearance. She thought for a moment, then turned around and took a box out of the closet. She rifled through for a bit before producing a pair of round glasses with red-tinted lenses. "Try these on for size," she said as she handed the spectacles to the demon. Freakshow took them and morphed the lenses of their original glasses back into their face, before placing the new glasses onto the bridge of their nose. They stepped forward and surveyed their new appearance in a mirror against the wall. A smile crept across their faces as they said, "Oh, wonderful, wonderful!" They beamed before turning back to Ellie. "Thank you, my new friend, but are you sure you're alright with me taking your glasses?" they said with an air of warmth to their tone. "Yeah, it's fine. Blue's much more my colour anyway," Ellie responded, pulling out a pair of similar glasses from within the box, these ones having blue lenses instead of red. Now, what about that hat? Ellie said, gesturing to the top hat still sat on Freakshow's head. Ah, well... They began with a nervous chuckle. The thing is, I actually can't take it off. They glanced to the side as Rebecca and Ellie shared a confused look. You can't? Rebecca asked as she stepped forward and attempted to remove the headwear, only to find that she was physically unable to. Indeed, Freakshow said, swatting her hand away. Many years ago I visited a fortune teller. However, I thought her fortunes to be utter balderdash, and as such I refused to pay her. However, as it turns out, she was in fact a real sorceress, and she cursed my hat to always be stuck on top of my head. And the worst part is, her fortune turned out to be true. They finished with a slump of their shoulders. What was the fortune? Rebecca asked. That it would rain on Tuesday. Ellie turned back to the closet. Right, enough of the dress-up, yeah? You need to show us what you've got. From the top shelf of the closet, she pulled out a dusty cardboard box, which she then placed on the bed and from within produced a strange-looking machine. This is an electric drum kit. It's not what we're using tonight, but it'll let you get some practice in. She said as she set up the device, attaching faux cymbals and plugging in a pedal. And once Ellie switched it on, they gently tapped one of the rubber pads with the stick, which produced a hi-hat sound. So, if I am on the drums, what are you two doing? Freakshow asked as they sat down on the bed, the old shot springs creaking beneath them. I'm on keyboard for extra instruments, as well as backing vocals. Rebecca said, Freakshow intrigued at the notion of her being a singer. And I'm on lead. With this! Ellie said, as she produced something from her closet. This is my axe! She proclaimed as she held up a black electric guitar, which looked to have seen better days. Part of its front plate was held on with duct tape, and there was a sizable dent in its side. Axe? Freakshow asked in confusion. It's just something people call guitars because they look like axes. And also because I used it to smack the fuck out of someone shouting shit on my first show. Ellie boasted, giving context to the dent on the side. Which landed you a night in the police station? Rebecca said dryly, with Ellie giving a nonchalant shrug. Peelers can't keep Ellie loudmouth Harrison locked up. Freakshow had been looking on confused at the conversation, before Ellie refocused her attention on practice, shouldering her guitar. Now that drum is pretty similar to the one we used tonight, except for like the fact that it's electric, yeah? What I mean, yeah, is that it's got all the same stuff on it that the real one does, so you should just be able to learn what to do from this, yeah? She rambled as she switched on her amplifier, before giving Freakshow a nod. They got ready to play, as Ellie prepared to count them in. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ellie and Freakshow began to play in tandem, Ellie plucking at the strings of her guitar as Freakshow tapped the drums perfectly in time. Rebecca looked on at the display in awe, surprised Freakshow was able to pick up the song so easily just from listening to it once. The pair played through the first verse, before Ellie halted her strumming, making Freakshow stop playing as well. Whoa, you're good, Mr. Freakshow. We're definitely going to knock him dead tonight at the pub. Freakshow smiled and set the drum set down next to them before standing upright. Please. We are all now very well acquainted. You may just call me Freakshow. There is no need for formalities anymore. They spoke warmly as Rebecca smiled with relief. Oh, thank God. I don't think I've said the word Mr. so much in my whole life. She joked, as Ellie was putting the instruments away. Right, show's not till later, so we can just chill it here till then, yeah? She said as she started towards the door. You don't want something to eat? I'm starved. She called as she exited the room. You're gonna hear that a lot from her. Rebecca said as she too started towards the door. She may not look it, but that woman eats like a horse. She joked as she stepped through the door. Freakshow gave one last look to the pet snake within its habitat, and with a final flick of their own forked tongue, followed their friends downstairs. Much later in the day, 5 PM to be exact, the newfound trio were in the back room of a local pub. Freakshow was familiarizing themselves with the drum kit, while Rebecca was practicing notes on her keyboard with headphones on. Occasionally, she would sing a few lines. Her voice was quiet but carried with it a beautiful sound. And then, there was Ellie, guitar strapped to her back, rolling around the room on a longboard while eating a nacho sandwich. a strange snack made by spreading salsa and nacho cheese dip on bread, before topping with tortilla chips and grated cheese. And while she was eating this, in her other hand was a glass of heavy metal juice, made by combining a fizzy drink with an energy drink and popping candy. And allegedly, Ellie consumed this quote-unquote meal before every show. Rebecca watched her chug the drink with a disgusted expression. The door to the room swung open, and in stepped the owner of the pub, a man named Stanley, who the establishment was named after. Stan was a brick wall of a man. However, despite his intimidating stature, he was really quite a big softy, as well as a close friend to Ellie. "Alright, you guys are on in 5 minutes. He spoke in a rumbling baritone. "Safe, Stanley man," Ellie said with her mouth full of the last of her sandwich. Stanley turned and closed the door, at which point Ellie jumped off her board and downed the rest of her drink. She set the glass aside and turned to her friends. "Right, we better get set up, yeah?" she said as she picked up her amplifier. Rebecca and Freakshow nodded and got everything ready, and before long, they were on the stage. "Alright everyone, you know what time it is. Raise your drinks for the one and only Ellie Harrison!" Stan called before his clapping and cheering patrons as the stage lights illuminated the trio in shades of blue. Ellie stepped up to the mic, wearing her round blue glasses, and addressed the audience. "Good evening, Melsburg!" she called to yet more applause. "Got a real special one for you tonight, yeah? Since we couldn't perform on Halloween because of my job." She made a thumbs down gesture at this and stuck her tongue out, and the crowd responded with booing and jeering. "We had to save it for tonight, but enough yapping, yeah? Is Baby Your Haunted House?" She readied herself and nodded to the others, signaling that it was time. "Let's get loud!" she called before beginning to play. "Baby, you're a haunted house. Better find another superstition. We're gonna stay in love somehow. 'Cause baby, you're a haunted house now. And your heart will stay forever when your last remains of you. In the dark, we dance together. And I'd like to be waiting with you. Oh baby, you're a haunted house. Better find another superstition. We're gonna stay in love somehow. 'Cause baby, you're a haunted house now." The nights, they last forever, and days are always making you blue. In the dark, we laugh together, 'cause the misery's funny to you. Oh baby, you're a haunted house. Better find another superstition. We're gonna stay in love somehow. 'Cause baby, you're a haunted house now. I'll be the only one who likes the things you do. I'll be the ghost inside your head when we are through. Sometimes you scare me, but I'll come around to you. I'll say hello, hello, hello. Find a way to scare you too. Oh baby, you're a haunted house. Better find another superstition. We're gonna stay in love somehow. 'Cause baby, you're a haunted house now. Oh baby, you're a haunted house. Better find another superstition. You better go and take a bow. 'Cause baby, you're a haunted house. Baby, you're a haunted house. Baby, you're a haunted house now. After the show had ended, patrons returned to their drinking, and the trio left. only after Ellie ran up to Stan and gave him a hug. Ellie herself was very tall, however, within Stan's huge arms, she looked like a child. After leaving, Rebecca and Freakshow followed behind Ellie as she sped on ahead on her longboard, excitement lacing their speech as they carried on. "Bex, mate, that was our best performance yet! And you weren't too bad yourself, freaks," Ellie said, rolling up next to Freakshow and giving them a gentle punch on their shoulder. They laughed and returned the gesture. "Oh, that was spectacular! Did you write that song yourself?" they asked, with Ellie giving a laugh in response. "I wish, but we ain't got the budget or talent for something like that," she said, looking beyond Freakshow and winking at absolutely nothing and nobody. "You know what?" Freakshow began. "I say we celebrate. How about we return to Rebecca's abode and I prepare us some well-earned grub?" They beamed to their friends as Ellie's eyes seemed to light up like fire. "Oh yes, I'm starving," she said with a wide grin as she patted her flat stomach like a drum. Rebecca rolled her eyes at the proclamation from her ravenous friend before asking, "You can cook?" Freakshow's expression turned to one of pride as they said, "Indeed I can. And I have just the delicacy in mind. We just need to find a nearby market so I may gather ingredients." "Oh, there's a big Tesco up the road. Let's go there," Ellie said as she pointed ahead. Her two friends nodded and they continued forward. Time passed and the trio were home again. Ellie and Rebecca were sat on the sofa, watching TV as Ellie scarfed down snacks she'd bought at the store. Meanwhile, Freakshow was busying themselves in the kitchen area, preparing a meal they called deviled bones, a dish of chicken wings seasoned with spices and sauces. It was a meal Freakshow knew from their time in Victorian Milnesburg, and wished to recreate it for their friends. However, were irked by the fact that they couldn't locate a particular ingredient: mushroom ketchup. Thankfully, however, Freakshow knew Worcester sauce was a good substitute, even if it did result in a long debate between Rebecca and Ellie about how it was pronounced, with Rebecca saying Worcester and Ellie saying Worcestershire. Ellie got up from the sofa to find something to drink. She looked through Rebecca's fridge and found a lone beer at the back, which she promptly claimed as her own. She approached Freakshow as they were seasoning the chicken before it would go into the oven, of which Rebecca helped with as they were intimidated by the modern machine. "Hey, cheers for helping us out today. You seriously saved our asses," Ellie said after a swig of her drink. Freakshow smiled warmly as they spread pepper over the meat. "You are most welcome, my friend. It has been a rather long time since I've done anyone a favour. I suppose after my long sleep, I'm just feeling very generous." They smiled, a gesture which Ellie returned. "By the way," Freakshow then said, "I have been wondering. Earlier, you declined my offer to assist in your transition. I am curious as to why." They spoke gently, and Ellie hesitated to answer for a moment, but after taking another sip of her drink, she responded. "I do really appreciate your offer, and it was super tempting at the time, but I've already come so far on my own, you know? Like, without any magic or nothing. So, I'm alright with taking things slowly when it comes to my transition. My body will change with time once I get the medication I want, and once that starts, I need time to adjust to it. It can't just happen all at once. You get me?" She said, surprisingly softly. Freakshow paused for a moment, before a warm smile grew on their face once more. "Indeed I do get you," they said, before Ellie gave them a playful shove. 20 minutes elapsed, and the food was ready, and Freakshow called their friends over to the small kitchen. Alongside the chicken, Freakshow had also whipped up some oven chips, which they were plating as Rebecca and Ellie approached. Once done, Freakshow turned their attention to a bowl of seasoned sauce for the chicken, mixing in a healthy dollop of honey before spreading it onto the wings. They snapped their fingers and the flame lit on its tip, which they then blew hard on, causing it to shoot forward, and they used this flame to lightly char the wings. That part would usually be done beneath the grill, but I've always found my method much more fun. Freakshow beamed as they began plating up the chicken. "It smells great, Freakshow. Did you cook for all your friends back in the day?" Rebecca asked as she moved to get a glass of water. Freakshow paused for a moment, as a somber smile formed on her face. "Actually, no. I did make many friends over the years, but I never stayed in one place for too long, so eventually I would have to leave them all behind," they said as they finished up the plating, handing the food to Rebecca and Ellie respectively. The women moved back to the sofa, and Freakshow followed. "How come you never stayed with them?" Ellie asked as she drowned her chips in ketchup. Freakshow sat between the pair as Rebecca picked up the TV remote. My kind can live for over 1,000 years, and human lives in comparison are but an eye blink. And after losing my first human friend to the cold grip of death, I just didn't want to go through it all again. They spoke with an air of bitter sorrow, one that caused Rebecca pause. What was this friend of yours like? She asked gently, making Freakshow's face contort into a warm smile, but still with saddened eyes. His name was Ezekiel. He was an older gentleman who had lost his legs to an infection. He was a fun one, I tell you. Loved a good drink. When we went to the local tavern, he'd wrap his arms around me like some form of rucksack. They said with laughter to the final remark. Yes, he and I were chock-a-boo. Practically inseparable. But, of course, even when I had met him, he was in the thralls of his dizzy age. And after a short 20 years of companionship, he peacefully passed away in his sleep. Their tone lowered, causing Ellie to halt the approach of her fork to her mouth. Silence followed for a short few seconds, before Rebecca placed a hand on Freakshow's shoulder. I know loss hurts, but it's all a part of life, for better or for worse. And besides, you've got us now, and we won't be going anywhere anytime soon, I promise. Rebecca smiled warmly, and as Freakshow looked down to her cookie crumb face, they couldn't help but smile back. Perhaps you are right. Spending time with you both has reminded me just how much I adore being around other people. And I am nearly 600 after all. Maybe it is time I stopped running around and found my place. They said warmly as they ruffled Rebecca's hair, causing her to giggle. Now, enough of sentiments. Shall we dig in? They said as they procured their own fork. Thought you never ask. Ellie said as she immediately began wolfing down her chips. Meanwhile, Rebecca picked up one of the wings from her plate and took a bite, her eyes widening as she was hit with the flavour. Oh my god, Freakshow, these are incredible! She said as Freakshow was finishing off a bite of their own wing. Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad to know my culinary skills have not waned over the past 100 years. They said it before the new friend group settled in for a fun night. One well spent together. Hang up, you're how old?